It's hard to hold out much hope for the economic reform roundtable scheduled for Canberra tomorrow. We need a more productive economy. We need to produce more for less. We need leaner, less expensive government. And we need to get out of the way of investment and development so that jobs and prosperity can be created. But all we get is the opposite. Remember the gold mine expansion that was cancelled because of late and disputed Indigenous cultural heritage claims? How can industry possibly invest when planning becomes such a heavily politicised gamble? One of the world's largest oil and gas producers, Chevron, has warned that environmental and Indigenous green tape like this and taxation levels are already putting a block on investment in Australia. But the ideas being put forward by the unions and Labor's chosen think tanks for its economic talkfest look like they'll make matters worse. The unions want a 4-day working week. That's an anti-productivity agenda. Others have put forward the return of the carbon tax. How many sequels can that horror story have? They've also floated new taxes on business and a broader and higher GST. And instead of promoting cheap and affordable energy as the lifeblood of the economy, they're just promoting a faster rollout of the renewables transition that's caused all of our problems to begin with. It all sounds like a recipe to accelerate the decline of our once strong and dynamic economy. It's not reform, it's regression, and it comes from the top. Listen to what the Prime Minister cites as his reform agenda.
Well, we are engaged in reform across the board, whether it be the transition to the clean energy economy, whether it be in childcare, the aged care reforms, the biggest reforms this century were passed at the end of last year. We're engaged in delivering on the Gonski vision of making sure that every student gets proper resourcing of their school, whether public or private. We're engaged with reforming the health system and primary health care with the tripling of bulk billing incentive and, importantly, the urgent care clinics that have now had 90 of them opened.
Really? This is his idea of reform? A list of more government giveaways, a list of more freebies for voters, all paid for with borrowed money in a budget that has deficits as far as the eye can see. No wonder they changed the name of this thing from a productivity event. Real productivity is exactly what we need. But now they call it an economic reform roundtable. And they count extra government spending as reform. They count extra taxes as reform. They count bigger government as reform. None of these things are reform, of course. What we need for reform is smaller government, not more public servants. What we need is cheaper energy, not more expensive power. What we need is less union power, not more union control. What we need is less red tape, not more regulation. And what we need is lower taxes, not heavier costs. But this is the most green left government this country's had since Gough Whitlam, of course, and it just has no idea how the real world works. I mean, at a time when we learn that 1 in 6 young boys is getting funding from the National Disability Insurance Scheme, 1 in 6, the runaway spending of this program, this gargantuan program that needs to be tackled, it clearly needs to be tackled. But listen to the Prime Minister's idea of restraint.
We've got the expenditure heading towards the interim objective of 8% growth, not a reduction. 8% growth is substantial.
Yeah, cutting NDIS growth to 8% is his aim. There's growth of almost 10% a year for a scheme that's already costing about $50 billion a year. Forget curbing its growth, the NDIS needs to be cut back. It was always going to be rorted. Still, this is a government that doesn't have the insight or the courage to curtail government in any area. As it happens, there was just one more little example of that was revealed today. The Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, has announced a cushy diplomatic job for long-time Labor mate and former Tasmanian Speaker Michelle O'Byrne. But have a look at the job. O'Byrne is to be the new Ambassador for Gender Equality. Yeah, another high-paying but pointless role, of course. What a ripper. It's a classic case of jobs for the boys or the girls, or jobs for those who prefer not to specify a gender, perhaps. Wong also announced a new ambassador for climate change today. That is Will Nankervis. He takes on this highly paid but essentially redundant job. This stuff is endless. I mean, we've got an ambassador for countering slavery and people smuggling too, and an ambassador for human rights. And then there's the ambassador for global health. And don't forget, there's Labor's big initiative, the ambassador for First Nations people. This is government getting bigger, getting more distracted from the real issues, more intent on ideological posturing and virtue signalling, and a long, long way from understanding the need for meaningful economic reform, let alone delivering it.